happy with the chairmanship and vice chairmanship.
Agreed.
Same as before.
Thank you and good evening. I'm Councillor Joe Hegan and I will be chairing the meeting as the chairman Peter Martin has given his apologies for this meeting. I'm assisted this evening by a number of officers: Tom Horwood, Robin Taylor, Zach Elwood, Louise Norrie, Catherine Knight, and several others who are not currently on the call, but I'll announce who they are as they step forward. The first item on the agenda we've dealt with. The second item on the agenda is to agree the minutes of the last meeting. Can councillors please indicate if they're happy with the minutes by saying agree, or raise your hand if you want to make any points regarding them.
Agreed.
So we resolved the minutes of the last meeting are an accurate account. The next item on the agenda is apologies for absence and substitutions. Georgina, has there been any?
There have been apologies from Peter Martin, who's being substituted by Councillor John Gray.
And the next item on the agenda is declarations of interest. Georgina, have you received any?
There's been no declarations.
And does anyone need to make any declarations now?
No.
And have there been any questions, Georgina, from members of the public? And have there been any questions from members? So the next item on the agenda is the committee work programme. I'm going to ask the scrutiny officer, Mark Mills, to lead on this item, please. Is Mark with us?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a few things to add on this. First of all, is that the items under Section A relating to the previous meeting, they've almost all of those actions are fulfilled by items coming back to this agenda, this meeting, and being on this agenda. The only exception is the item on the community infrastructure levy, which, as I understand it, essentially the process finished too recently for a report to be available now. So I'll move that onto the future items. Speaking of which, I just note as always that if anyone has any ideas about future items they'd like to see, very welcome to raise that with me, drop me an email, and even though scrutiny is obviously in a state of flux at the moment, we can continue accumulating ideas and building a work programme.
Does anyone have any comments on the work programme? It occurs to me that we're going to have a major piece of work coming upon us at some point in the next month, when the papers are available for the collaboration with Guildford, where according to Robin Taylor's email, there'll be a very tight timeline for us to follow between the publication of papers and everything going to council. I don't know if we know yet from any of the officers when that meeting is likely to be, because it seems sensible to get some dates in the diary sooner rather than later. I don't know if Robin Taylor could just give us some guidance on how that might look.
Chairman, could you repeat the question, please?
Your email about the collaboration with Guildford, and there's a reference in your email to ONS looking at the proposals between executive and council, which gives us about a week, but I think it would be good to get a date in that week and some idea of what will be expected. Is it just this ONS committee that will be looking at those proposals, or all of them?
The plan is, Chairman, to consult all of the chairs and vice chairs of the scrutiny committees to come to a decision as to whether it is this committee or whether it is some sort of joint or extra committee, but we will consult before we put that in the diary. But I absolutely agree, it does need to go into the diary soon now that we've got that agreed plan with Guildford. Thank you, Chair.
Any other thoughts on this item, members, or should we move on to the next item?
I can move on, Madam Chair.
Okay. So the next item on our agenda after the work programme, items 8 and 9, I think need to be reversed around so that we look at the key performance indicator review report before we then look at the quarter 4 report. So is Louise Norrie going to say anything to us with regard to the key performance indicator review report?
Thank you, Chairman. I've got Nora Copping with us tonight, who is the Policy and Performance Officer who's just come back from maternity leave. So I think she might like to say a few words on this review.
Okay, thank you. Nora, are you there?
I am here. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to work out the technology. Good evening, the members. So we have in front of us the performance report for the 4th quarter, and we're going to start with the proposals of the new performance indicators. I believe on the, I'm not quite sure what page number the members will be looking at. We have the table with all the new proposed indicators. The areas that have changed for this particular committee are mainly the policy and governance area, and I believe Robin might be able to expand a little bit more, to provide a little bit more context to how we derive to those conclusions, and we propose the specific set of indicators. So what we are asking the members to do tonight is to consider those indicators and propose those to the executive if you agree that this is the way forward for us to monitor the performance for those specific areas. With regards to the performance reports, each of the head of service will be covering their own sections, providing the feedback on what have happened in the year just gone. So I will pass that on to the heads of service.
Okay, members, does anyone have any comments on the proposals? I've got 2 sets of paper, but mine says now agenda item 8, which came out with the final performance report.
Should that say 9?
Well, it was in the agenda as 9, but as I say, the most recent set of papers I have calls it agenda item 8, which sits alongside the final version of the performance report.
Which one are we taking at the moment?
We're taking the new performance indicators first, and then on to the next actual considering the final quarter of 2021 performance report itself.
But Madam Chairman, is that page 18 and 19 of the main report?
It wasn't in my copy of the main report. It's pages 6 and 7 of the pages that were sent around with the final version of the quarterly report. It looks like that, yes.
I have it, that's my main report.
Right,
Yeah,
okay.
This one. Thank you.
Chair, can I just make a comment? There has been a note from the Chief Exec about putting information on the reports for date of issue and what sort of things, so there's no confusion about which is the latest version.
Yes.
We don't have that in these reports.
No, I agree, and I'm finding it very complicated. There is agreement and sign-off dates in here of May 2021, but it's proved difficult. But yes, page 17, 18 and 19 are the same as I have been given here. So the first set is business transformation, where we still don't have any established performance indicators, and that's apparently being reviewed as part of the customer service review. I don't know if members have any feelings on that.
Not until we see what they are, I think. Okay.
We're looking at business transformation and the RCT project on the agenda, aren't we, later?
We are,
So-
but this is whether we are asking the officers to adopt any performance indicators or asking the exec to impose any performance indicators so we can monitor the performance of work streams through the year.
And I think it would be a good idea if we were to come back to that after we've spoken. Do you know what I mean? Just put that,
Yeah,
our
okay.
comments there on hold till after we've discussed the whole issue, rather than going to it twice. Yeah.
That's a good point, Councillor Hyman.
Can I first ask, do you mind if the update sheet, pages 6 and 7 and 8 are identical to pages 18, 19 and 20, 21 of the original report, or whether there are changes I ought to know about, because I've only read those in the original report. I've obviously looked at all the pretty pictures on the other.
I couldn't see any changes.
No.
Louise, there aren't any, are there? Thank you. Okay, into finance.
Chairman, sorry, I think what's been already mentioned needs to be repeated. One of the biggest weaknesses in the way Wayfield does business is its failure to use version control. It makes it difficult for us to know what has been changed. It causes extra work, and it leads to a great deal of uncertainty when we really are dealing with the current versions. And I think it's something which the Chief Executive, I hope he's listening, will take on board as a serious complaint, which has been made many times before. And it's really quite disappointing that it seemed to fall on deaf ears. And I would actually wait for people to give an explanation why it hasn't been dealt with before. And now in May 2021, can we have a commitment? This will not be allowed to continue. Yeah.
Tom?
Could we invite Tom to comment on that?
Chair, if I may clarify that the covering report that you are seeing in front of you, both of the versions are exactly identical. The only thing that has changed was the addition of the annex of the actual Q4 performance report that we have not had in the main agenda that was dispatched to you. So there were no changes at all, and apologies from us for not making it quite clear with regards to the version control, but there were no changes in the covering report in the proposals of the key performance indicators. So what you are seeing in here, in whichever version you're looking at, it is exactly the same information. The only addition was the addition of the Annex 1, which contains the Q4 performance report, but we'll make it very clear in the future when we have to add additional papers as the following papers, to make it sure that it's not confusing which version we're actually looking at. So apologies from us.
Well, that is the current thing. I'm concerned with the general position which applies to all council papers. It's not just for me. So if the Chief Executive is listening, could he perhaps comment on this? It's something which certainly exercises me considerably. Tom, do you have a comment?
Yes, Madam Chairman, would you like me to comment?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Through you then, please. Certainly the version I'm looking at says final version and 19 May 2021. I'm not conscious of a previous version that has been circulated to councillors, and if there has been one that I haven't seen, I apologise for that. The general point about version control certainly has been made and has and does need to be taken on board. I've certainly seen it grow in frequency a great deal more. But if there are specific examples that councillors would like to share with me, perhaps through an email afterwards, I'd be happy to have a look at them and remind colleagues to do that. Thank you.
Yes, certainly we did receive a previous version of the quarterly report, and it is quite confusing.
If I may, Madam Chairman, perhaps I could just ask colleagues just to confirm which version you have seen before, because I believe you've only seen the final version. I appreciate, just as Mrs. Copping has said, that the report, the cover report, you have seen before, and it is indeed identical. It is the same report, so there's no question of version on that particular report. But again, I'd be pleased to be corrected if I've made a mistake there, or if I'm under a misapprehension.
Councillor Hyman wished to speak, but I can assure you I've had 2 copies of the quarterly report, one of which says final version and the other didn't say final version.
One of the problems here, I think, if you look at the blue pages at the front of our officer report, the main one that we received first of all, and they don't have page numbers on them, 2, 3, but on page, the 4th page of the blue covers, it says that item 8 is corporate performance report, quarter 4, and item 9 is the key performance indicator review report. And then if you then turn to page 17 of our agenda document, it says agenda item 8 is both titled corporate performance report and annual review of performance indicators. So in the front, it's separated into 8 and 9. We've then got it both in one report, and then we've received a separate document which said 8 on the top of it, which is quite confusing for us. And I think that's partially where the confusion has arisen and why we're not entirely sure exactly what we're meant to be doing. Well, I think we know what we want to do now, which is move on with it. But I think that's the problem.
But I mean, I think,
gentlemen and ladies?
yes, I mean, the whole agenda, we don't actually have any papers now with agenda item 9 written against them, but so it did cause me some confusion this afternoon. But I think we do now know which document we're discussing, which, as Councillor Hyman suggested, we leave business transformation and the potential need for any performance indicators there until we've looked at that item in the agenda. So the next, sorry, Councillor Davies.
If I could just add on to what Councillor Hyman suggested, is that once the business transformation team have come up with their PIs, that they circulate that immediately so that we have some time to be able to consider what is being proposed.
Can I have a further comment? Tom, I think the issue is when things are changed, what we want is a tracked document so we can see what has been changed. We should not be in a position where we have to read the whole document again and try and work out for ourselves what, if anything, has changed. It's that which is the frustrating part. We accept that officers have some time to send out revised versions. That's fine. But could they please send out a tracked version so we know what the changes are and then we can work out what the significance is.
Changes could always be printed in red to save a lot of wading back to
Something
which shows
different ways of doing it. Anything that tells us whether we need to read it through again and compare the two or not.
Yeah.
We went through this 2 years ago, at the beginning of this administration, and we had a promise that we would have track changes documents. That was a promise made in the council chamber by John Moore. And although he's not the leader now, but we assume that promise remains with us. We want to see them.
Okay, any other observations before we move into the finance and property performance indicators?
I just asked, Chair, on this performance report, you told us the same. The only difference is that there's an annex to this. This is the only new bit.
Well, the annex was already in the original papers. Sorry, it came separate to the original papers, but that apparently wasn't correct. So I didn't know what the difference was meant to be. There was no explanation. So the separate document that is agenda item 8, the key performance indicator proposals, and then the quarterly performance report marked final version is the document we're all considering. And the one you're flicking through there isn't the final version.
Final one, yeah.
Just to prove our point.
Although we have had it confirmed, Madam Chairman, that it is the same as far as the key performance indicator.
Well, as far as the key performance indicators are, so if we could move back, please, to the finance and property section, where there's one new performance indicator proposed, which is the net return on property as a percentage as a data-only item. Otherwise, the performance indicators remain the ones that we're very used to seeing in terms of tax collection, invoice payment and processing time for housing benefit claims. Councillor Hannon.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, the new performance indicator F6 is proposed, which is the net return on property.
Yeah.
My own consideration here has been, well, limited, to be honest, because I haven't had a lot of time to put my mind to it, but that we have got two different forms, effectively, of property investment, or you could say even many forms, but two main. One which is historic which we've owned them for a long time, and we're receiving 5%, whatever it happens to be return on those. Long established, the management of those has been established quite successfully over many, many years. We've now got a new property investment strategy, which I prefer the name to be changed, but we have got a new PIS, and it's something which a lot of us want to keep a close eye on that way. And that's got a completely different approach because it is an investment strategy in order to supplement the council's income rather than long-standing ownership of public properties that are rented out. So those, I think they should be separated completely so that the net return that we read when we read this reflects the property investment strategy and doesn't include the historic ones, because otherwise we're being a bit misled. Otherwise we have two lots, one for each, and I don't know that we're particularly interested in keeping too much track on the relatively small level of historic.
Could Peter Vickers please explain what's envisaged here?
But can I just add this so that he knows what he's answering to? I can say that what we really need to separate them out, we also need the costs separated, because obviously there are costs of running this within the council, which may or may not be included within that. Do you know what I mean? If you look at each individual investment and say that's the return.
I understand what you're saying there. I am interested though in Peter Vickers' comments, because much of the information is in the pink papers that are attaching to this agenda in any event. And I think they're pink for a reason, and I don't understand what's envisaged by the new performance indicator for the quarterly report. So if Peter could clarify that.
Chairman, Peter Vickers. So I don't fully agree with what Councillor Hyman's saying around the property investment. By their sheer nature, they are investment properties, whether they're long-standing or whether they're recent acquisitions in the last 5 years or even last year. They're all investment properties. We're not precious about any of them. We hold them for a reason. We manage them on the basis they are investment properties with a return. We have strategies around those properties which are reflected in our property investment strategy. They all provide a return, and if as part of our management of those properties within that overall portfolio, a property isn't performing the way we're expecting and we think that there's a reason to divest, we would be looking at divesting a property, or we re-gear leases and we manage those properties appropriately in terms of cost. So I don't see a difference when I look at our investment properties between something we may have had for a long time and those that we've had more recently. They're all investment properties. They're not held for service provision as such as pavilions and the buries, for instance. But those are very different types of asset. So it would be a very artificial thing to paint a picture of we have two portfolios. We don't. We have one portfolio. It's investment asset.
I invite any other members' comments. Councillor Mulliner?
Well, thank you, Peter, for the response. I'm afraid I don't fully agree with you. The other thing we have to take into account is things like the minimum revenue provision, which, as far as I know, doesn't apply to the historic assets. And indeed, when we come on to agenda item 14A, I had one or two suggestions to make, which probably belong better there. I think if we are going to report net return on property, we should ensure that it is the genuine net return. And one thing I wanted to ask at the right time was how we estimate or apply management costs to each of them and whether they actually feature in the proposed calculation of net return.
Chairman, so Councillor Mulliner, MRP, minimum revenue provision, is a corporate financing matter. We don't actually attribute MRP to a particular asset within the portfolio. There's probably a confusion coming in there that when we assess an asset as a prospective purchase, we would consider MRP because that's how we benchmark every asset we look at on the same level playing field. So we always treat those assets as though we've borrowed. So we would put MRP against that. So MRP is a fiction that we have to deal with in local government capital financing regime. It applies to our capital financing position, our CFR, which is all to do with the balance sheet as a whole. It's not about individual asset. So it's a bit of a technical explanation, but that's as basic as I can put it to the table, to the meeting. In terms of cost, we don't allocate the cost of managing assets to individual assets. We have a small team of 4 within the asset management team who look after all of our assets, including the portfolio. Plus, where necessary, we buy in particular expertise to look at specific items around valuation and lease regearing. But apart from that, we don't allocate overhead to individual assets. It wouldn't mean a lot to us to do that.
Can I try and move this on, because I'm very conscious of time passing? This is a proposed new performance indicator. Despite the conversations we've had, I can't visualise what's envisaged for the future performance reports. Is it one number? Is it broken down by property? How does it differ or add to the paper that we get in the pink paper? I don't think we should push for an answer here. I think we should record that as a committee, we're not clear as to what's proposed, the value that it adds, and what's going to be different to what we've had before. Councillor Gray wishes to speak.
Just one question, and that is that they're proposing it's a percentage rather than an absolute value. What is the return versus our target? So if we could have a very positive return percent and still fail to meet basically our financial commitment. So I think we need to understand what it is we're trying to get with this particular thought.
Yeah, I think that's precisely my thoughts. We need to understand what's being driven at and how it's intended to be presented.
It's meaningful.
Yeah. Can we move on from that, Peter?
Chair, I'm happy to move on from that. I hear the committee's views on that, and we'll look into it.
Okay.
Well, can we have comments that go forward officially from this, because that's what we're meant to be doing now, is having comments going forward, and we want to ensure that our comment is that we want these to be meaningful.
Yes.
And in relation to our corporate strategy as well, our actual targets.
Yes, for a measure to be included at all, it has to be meaningful and it has to relate to the corporate targets. Okay. Policy and governance. We have quite a few unchanged performance indicators and also quite a few new ones. Does anyone have any questions, comments or observations on this section? Councillor Gray?
Yes, so thank you, Madam Chairman. And basically, it's what I was looking for was the reasoning. If we look at this on PG5A and PG5B, this is the number of local land charges searches received and the percentage that are responded to within 10 days. I mean, I'm delighted this is on here because I have had a number of residents complain about land charge performances. So I'm pleased this comes in, but it would help us to know what issue this is trying to address. I see what it is, I can visualize it, but I'm not quite sure why that was chosen as addition now. It's always been there, so why has it come?
Well, the work's always been there, but the measurement hasn't, as I understand it. And with you, I've had complaints as well. I think it is part of our external service that our residents monitor us by, and we should know what they're seeing.
Yep, I agree with that. I'm just wondering if that's why it's been put on there.
I'm not sure the why matters if we're happy with the fact that it's on there.
I mean,
Councillor Mulliner.
thanks, Chairman. I'm glad to see these, and my only comment was a slight logical eyebrow raised that the 3, 4, and 5, the A is what is being recorded, and the B is how quickly the requests are serviced. Whereas 1A and 1B and 2A and 2B work on a different basis, and thus it would certainly be logically pleasing if 1B became 2A and 2A became 1B, then everything would be in the same arrangement with the number of instances first and how efficiently we're responding to them second with the B. So I mean, it's just a tiny point, but having seen how well it's been laid out for 3, 4 and 5, it seems a pity that 1 and 2 don't follow the same approach.
On the basis they're the historical ones.
Of course, yes, quite. But now that there's more,
I think there is a point perhaps for
minor one, please.
Robin Taylor to take
Yes.
away for consistency.
Yeah, exactly.
Councillor Hyman.
Thank you. Well, I would like to thank Councillor Mulliner for jumping in and explaining that, because I was about to have to, and I would have got it, and nobody would understand it when I'd explained it. Right, PG3B, or in fact 3A and 3B, in respect of number of freedom of information, FOI and EIR requests received and responded to. Now, 3B says responded to within statutory timescale. The statutory timescale is 28 days unless it isn't. There is a rule in there that we have to respond within 28 days, but we can respond saying we can't respond yet and we want another 28 days. And I think on a loose basis, officers will agree that that is correct, or at least it was up until the last time I put in an EIR and FOI request. And I confirm it still is, which means that actually we're asking a question of what is the statutory timescale we're referring to here? Is it 28 days? Is it 56 days? Or in actual fact, what we really want to know is how many FOI EIR requests were responded to with the information requested where available. It gets quite complicated, obviously, because we don't want to be punishing ourselves, so to speak, for if we're saying, I'm sorry, you can't have that information because it doesn't exist. But if we're saying, well, actually, you just can't have it and we're not going to tell you why, that's a completely different matter. And these are difficulties people have when they're trying to get hold of information out of organisations, where you have to look at the different, what problems are real people experiencing in real life getting information. I've asked for information, been told it's not our position to provide that, even though it's a document the council should have, it's many years ago prior to being a council. And so we need this to be meaningful, and that isn't, it's meaningless where it says within the statutory timescale, because none of us would understand what we're actually satisfying and what we weren't.
Can we have a comment from Robin Taylor on that, please? I mean, my thinking was, listening to Councillor Hyman, is it's a bit like the complaints. Surely there's a way to split this between the complaints that are the requests that are dealt with within the normal time frame and those that need an extended time frame for reasons and then are either met or not met. But perhaps Robin Taylor could comment on what's been said.
Thank you, Chair. So just a few comments. Firstly, on the A and the B, I can understand Councillor Mulliner's point. We're absolutely happy to harmonise that with the logic of the rest of the PI set. That makes absolute sense to me. In terms of why these are put forward, very briefly, it's to try and focus, as you said, on a frontline customer service. And as you said, Chairman, this is something which has been measured for some time in terms of the land searches. It's really just about bringing the information from that into the public environment, which we have done in the past, and it's bringing that back really for visibility. In terms of the statutory timescales, I understand the point being made. I mean, I think there's always a choice to be made between how many indicators we have, and how far you subdivide those. If the will of the committee is that, your suggestion is that it should be subdivided into more than one indicator, then we can certainly bring that back with a suggested new definition. Thank you, Chair.
What's the view of the committee? My personal feeling is it's new, let's get up and running for a year, and if we need further granularity after 12 months, look at it again then. Would that be reasonable?
Well, that's a very sensible way of putting it. I agree.
But in terms of 3B now, I would agree with that, because it's not giving us any information that's worth having. So let's not bother if we're not going to have information that's worth having.
I disagree. I think it's worth knowing how many of these requests come in. It's a resourcing issue, it's a customer service issue.
Yes, I agree.
and we can look in 12 months as to whether the granularity needs to be increased.
As long as it's clear what we are looking at, whether it's, you know, a 28-day or a 56-day is considered to be, because the statutory requirements is 56 days, and in fact there is no statutory requirement to respond, as far as I know, in terms of receipt of information. You only have to acknowledge. It's not very, to me, it wouldn't tell us anything necessarily. Well, I would not understand reading it. I would not understand what it was telling me, and that's the whole point. Was it?
But there is scope in the quarterly performance reports for officer comments. Again, I come back to this as new, and I don't think we should push for a lot of numbers until we see what the high level numbers look like in combination with the officer comment.
Can we just quickly look at PG 4A and 4B, because I'm wondering whether subject access requests are data protection issues, personal information, or is it something that I've just got COVID brain fog, but I don't know what subject access.
I do believe this is under the data protection regulations.
Could it say so? I mean, so that people knew what it was saying.
I mean, I think there's a, Chair, through you, there's a wider question, I think, about having, you know, broader definitions of all of these. Are the shorthand descriptions for all of these key performance indicators, and it may be a case that we need to separately define all of these in a document elsewhere. Those of you who will remember the best value performance indicator set will remember there was always a manual that went along with it, but you don't always want that full definition within the table itself and within the short description. Subject access requests are all about personal data. It's where somebody asks the council to give them all of the data which refers to them. So the subject access is about where do you refer to me in your records.
And that would be presumably employees and residents.
Generally residents, but it can apply to employees. I mean, obviously, in general employees, we would expect to speak to the council, you know, as a colleague and within our own internal processes. But the law allows a range of individuals to use this legislation.
Okay.
Can we call that subject data access then, so that people don't, that everybody knows what it is? Because otherwise, we're always going to be asking, what does this mean? Can we just say subject data access or personal data access?
Would need, yeah, I think Robin's got the message. We would like
The regulation
to understand without doubt when we actually see the reports. But I think the general feeling is that it's a good step forward. Let's not go too deep till we see how it looks in practice. Councillor Mulliner.
Thank you, Chairman. One final comment. It would be quite useful to have a sort of at least the last four quarters shown when they first appear. It's much easier to see if anything interesting is happening and see what the trend is, rather than one initial snapshot, which will not tell us all that much.
Yeah.
So if we could do that, that would be helpful.
I think that's a sensible. I'm getting nods around the table as far as that
Yeah,
one's concerned.
If I could just clarify on that one, that we will where we can. So there's a combination here of things which we've been recording and where we can do that, and others where I don't think we can because it's, you know, a new approach. So if I can give you the commitment that we will where we can, hopefully that will be acceptable.
Thank you.
Thank you. Financial services, building control only. I looked and I couldn't find ever having seen that as something that's been in the section that comes to this committee. Have other members ever noticed us getting a report on the completion of building control applications? And if so, why is it only 80% target?
Maybe it's never been on anywhere at all before, and someone suddenly thought, let's find it at home.
Well, the comment is that it's unchanged, but I couldn't find it anywhere in the last year's quarterly performance reports.
Well, maybe it's just a typo that instead of saying unchanged, it should be new PIs proposed.
Can someone clarify that for us,
I think
please?
it's always been on there, actually.
I couldn't find it.
If I may, due to the business nature of building control, the performance monitoring of that specific area quite often was coming actually, the monetary aspect of the team was coming to the value for money committee. So this performance indicator was brought to this committee for attention.
So is it in our quarterly performance report that we're looking at this quarter? Because I couldn't find it.
I think it will be still in the planning section.
I couldn't find it there either, but
I don't believe it is there.
It's not. Then
Well,
my apologies.
because
if
it
there was-
doesn't sit within planning anymore. It's within commercial services.
Oh, I'm sorry. Have I mixed things up? I'm extremely sorry. My first committee after the maternity leave. I'm just have a handover of the report. So bear with me just a second. I'm going to try to find this information.
Can we come back to that?
Of course.
Move on to planning and economic development. We've also got an item on the agenda for that, and I'd like to propose to the committee that we adjourn discussion of performance indicators for planning and economic development till we get to that part of the agenda. So, assuming that in future committee we are going to be looking at the performance of the building control applications, does anyone have any view on whether we leave a target of 80% within 10 days?
No idea.
Chairman, I think we need justification to it. I mean, it does strike me as being slightly odd.
It does me as well.
Looking at other targets throughout the things, 80% particularly low.
Yeah.
And there must be a reason for 80%, and perhaps the person who's putting it forward can justify it.
Otherwise, we have a performance indicator that says all within a certain time.
Policy manager has raised her hand, she may want to come back.
All right.
20% currently.
Sorry, who's?
Sorry, Chairman, it was me, Louise. I was just going to point out that C4, the building control applications, is in the performance report under commercial services. It does figure in there, and
What page?
page 36 of the, if it's the same numbering, sorry. 26 of the actual performance report.
Yeah.
So there's C4 there. Percentage of complete building control applications checked.
Sorry, that's page 36.
Yeah,
Yes, it is.
Right,
we got it.
okay, I've got it.
And I think looking at that, you can see that there have been times when it's been well within that target, and there have been some tests. Clearly, the last year under COVID, it sort of dipped into the red, but it's going back up to 80% now. So it may be something you want to raise with Kelvin.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think that you raised an excellent point in terms of questioning why it should be 85% if we approached it.
I would suggest
in the absence
that,
of anything else.
yeah, I feel very much that 80% is a target that's too low and that we should be aspiring to be better. If we could put that proposal forward.
100. 12 days for 100.
Well, we've had 80%, 85% is still a reasonable increase, doesn't it?
I think so.
It's not asking for some improvement, we're not asking for the impossible.
It's still allowing for a lot of them not to be checked. I was rather that we check all of them, 100% of them, and within a certain time span. So if it takes longer, I would rather 100% within 12 or 14 days than saying, oh, 15% or 20%, we're not going to, but we don't have to check.
That's right. I think we should see
Which I
how
think is ridiculous. I don't know, it's just logic, perhaps I'm completely wrong and I've missed something.
I think that then goes to the logic of the whole report though, because in we could, otherwise we'd be saying 100% for everything, which I don't think historically makes sense.
I think
But
we have to make
know.
reasonable targets for people to look at and say, why isn't produced faster? Well, I think 100%, it's quite impossible. If you say a reasonable increase, 80 to 85, then people will say, right, that's doable. You know, it has to be doable by people. You know, they haven't got enough in regards to cynical exercise. They have to say, well, yes, we can do 85%. It's possible to do. So let's set targets which are possible rather than which are impossible.
Okay.
Logically, what we want is all of them to be checked.
I'm losing
And it's the
control.
timescale.
I'm losing
You do.
control of this agenda. Can we stop at this point and say that the committee is not comfortable with a target of only 80%, whereas historically we've achieved more, and we would ask that that be looked at again.
Chairman, perhaps we should ask for an explanation of why that particular level has been chosen.
Yes.
Whether a higher one, like 85%, would be reasonable. May well
Or
be
as the
start-
resourcing imputations that are just make it impossible.
Similar comment actually, why is it 10 days?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, the whole thing looks a little out of sync with the sort of performance targets that we have. And I just think if we're to be responsible for reviewing this area, we need more understanding, but we can't debate it further now.
And it doesn't imply that the other 20% aren't checked, but they're not checked within 10 days.
Yeah, which is in itself quite a demanding target. So, but I think the message should be we'd want to know what happens to the other 20%. We'd like to see something that's more encompassing.
Should we have a timescale for that as well?
I don't think we have the information to propose that. I think our role is to highlight to the officers and the executive that we want to understand this area better and have something that's either higher, even if it's stretched out to be, you know, if it's 80% in 10 days, maybe it's more meaningful to know that it's 95% within 15 days. But it's an area we're not comfortable with the balance. Is that fair?
Yes. Agreed.
Right. Looking at the actual performance report that's in front of us. Nora, did you have any particular points you wanted to draw to our attention or in our sections of the overall report? Or are we just...
I'm sorry, Chairman, could I just very briefly, and maybe that Zach can help me here, but my understanding on building control applications is once they've gone outside the 10 days, they sort of get a deemed consent. So you have to do it within that statutory timescale, otherwise they get, can I get Zach to clarify that?
Chairman, through you can ask me that question, but I've never once been responsible for building control in 25 years, so I probably wouldn't be the best person to help on that. Sorry.
Then don't worry. I'll clarify that back to all of you.
Yes, if that is the situation and that consent happens by default, then that, as the committee monitoring, that's certainly something that we need to be briefing
That
about.
actually increases the, if you like, concern we would have that over 20% are being allowed through without being checked, which is what I think I'm hearing.
And that would be a concern, and that would certainly slant the resource argument that would otherwise exist.
I mean, if whoever is au fait with this could let us know, perhaps at the next meeting, have a good slot.
I will circulate. I'll circulate the information, Chairman.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
Chair.
Yes, Mr. Councillor Marriott.
Back on the planning and economic development.
Yes.
Performance certificates. I mean, page 24. I know you said you wanted to leave this to the Saturday item in the agenda. Page 24 has a list of reports, but the text on page 7 says we don't have any PIs. Is there a mismatch in those words to what's
Sorry,
shown?
which page are you looking at?
Page 7, where it just says we do not currently have any established PIs.
Yes.
And then page 24 is a whole list of them.
Chairman, through you, can I just clarify what's meant there is we do not have any established economic development PIs, and this is the ONS Committee for Value for Money, which the only element of my service that you're considering is the economic development side. The Environment ONS considers the KPIs for planning, so that explains any confusion. Yes, there are loads of PIs for planning. That we don't have any established for economic development, but we're very keen to do that. And obviously, when we come to that item through you, Chair, we would like to sort of seek feedback on that. Thank you.
I mean, I haven't looked at pages 24 onwards, but I do notice on page 28, outcome 24 is support healthy town centres by closely working with the local chamber and town clerks. But I don't think this is an ideal way to bring matters forward, just to put something in without comment and justification. But is outcome 24 not economic development?
That's in terms of the service plans, yes, sorry. It's not, but it's not a KPI, it's one of our service plan indicators.
Right. So if we go back to leaving it to when we talk about the economic development.
I just have one more comment on this section.
Yes.
In relation to the KPIs. There's a section, if you can find it, on the page 31. And that's to do with carbon neutrality action plan. I'm not sure what this, where we're going with this, because it says that there are studies underway to look at various aspects of PBRs, things of this sort.
Sorry,
I think you might have moved on to KPIs themselves rather than.
That's what I'm just looking at. I'm just looking at what would have been.
Chairman, that's actually under the environment section,
Yes,
which will come under environment ONS, not this committee.
No, I accept that. It's just that we don't make any comment about that in here.
sorry, about what, sorry?
About any KPIs or any action which is going to.
We're only invited to look at the KPIs for the areas that we
Just these ones, are
are responsible for.
okay.
If you have any comments on the others, I suggest we put them as comments and questions to the relevant ONS committee.
And we'll do that, yes, okay.
Okay, right. So moving into the body of our performance report and the pages that we're asked to look at from page 51 onwards, unless Laura, you had any comments on the overall report or anything you think we should be focusing on?
Sorry, Madam Chair, are we talking about agenda 51 or the report 50? Agenda 51.
Agenda 51.
Thank you.
Because in report, it's report 41, which I always find terribly confusing.
Chair, if I may, so we would ask the committee to scrutinize the performance report for the fourth quarter and end of the year. So we have 3 head of service dashboards. I do not have specific pages of the agenda. I have just the report pages. Do excuse me for that. So it's page 41 of the actual report. And we will start with business transformation. So each of the head of service will have an opportunity to present any key points and highlights they would like to present to the committee. And we will start with business transformation and David Allen.
David?
Evening, everyone. I'll just highlight a few, draw out a few things from the report of particular interest. I think the main achievements in the last quarter were the IT strategy was approved at full council. At the moment, we're going through a major Citrix upgrade for the whole organisation that will significantly improve our kind of service in that respect. I would just kind of mention that the staff travel project is still moving through its various stages. Consultation was underway last quarter, and it's indeed still moving on this quarter. Last quarter, we saw Horizon IT system introduced. That is kind of working, and we're now bedding that in. And we are now working on the future office working project, or the Where Work Happens project, as we call it. And that is aiming at gearing us up for a smaller footprint going forward and responding also to the changes in working practice during COVID. And that is now a kind of major project, and the timescales on that are fairly tight because we are looking to sort of conclude things by September if we can do. We've just run a full staff survey on that very subject, and it aligns very closely with the work that Peter's doing on the replacement or the potential replacement of the Beveridge building. There was some conversation earlier on about performance indicators and business transformation, and they're particularly aimed at the customer services area. We have actually, at an officer level, come up with 7 measures or indicators that we're proposing to collect. And we could put those forward for the consideration of the committee at the next meeting or at any time, actually. But we haven't done so far because we haven't actually got collection mechanisms in place for everything. So we're working on those. They're indicators that we think are important, but we need to establish the collection mechanisms to support them. And just the kind of final thing I would mention is that you might notice on the finance page, we did manage to come in with a favourable balance at the end of the year, and I've bullet pointed the reasons why that was the case.
I thought you would resist slipping that one in. Thank you.
Well,
as a general comment, I think that it would be helpful to know what performance indicators you're visualising even before you finish the data collection, because if we then don't like something, we've lost time. It may be that things aren't possible, but I think it would be useful to know what you are focusing on, so that we have an opportunity to feed into that process.
Okay, well, we've already got them, so I can let you have those at any time, Chair.
Would the committee like to see those?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think we can feed back comments without us just waiting for the next committee meeting, if there's anything of note in there. Any other observations on the business transformation area?
Well, that's good to know, Chairman. Whether the new general inquiries team, are they finding, I mean, there's an interesting comment that waste collection has given rise to a very large amount of business, if you wish. Are these reasonably short calls, which just take a 30 seconds or a minute to service, or are they actually taking up an awful lot of people's day?
They do vary because a lot of them are around missed bins. That is the primary factor. If you've had your bin missed a few times in a row, then the call tends to be a little bit longer because people need to let us know how they're feeling about that. So, you know, the team are under kind of pressure dealing with those inquiries at the moment. The numbers were very high in January and March in particular, mainly because of COVID. That had a very big effect on the crews, because obviously the guys who are working on the trucks are in, you know, they're sat right next to each other all day. So one goes down, they all go down, and you lose an entire round, and then you've got to catch up. So that has been a primary driver for the reason that bins have been missed.
Right.
Okay.
And you're going to hopefully replace it with a self-service solution, presumably next quarter.
For many of the calls, there will be self-service options. I'm not sure that'll be ready next quarter. The first one that we're working on is the green waste issue. So people can renew and order green waste bins online, and then we'll get on to missed bins and ordinary bin ordering.
Is the plan to have basically the same approach as Surrey have to potholes? You can go onto the website and register the fact that your bin has been missed.
Yeah, fully automated, and then it can go straight to the contractor and be responded to.
Great, good, thank you. That sounds a great advance when it happens.
Well, I could add, I hope that we will respond slightly better than Surrey does with regard to its potholes.
I couldn't possibly comment.
Okay. If Councillor Hammond?
Only if we're starting at page 51 and we're looking at the moment at business transformation, there's some consideration there of the New Horizon planning system. And whilst planning itself obviously is an issue for environment overview and scrutiny and planning committees, the computer systems we use to control them are very much a matter of, they come under our remit, so under value for money. We know, I think we all know, that there have been enormous hold-ups and difficulties with the Horizon system coming through early. I'm very much hoping that we will be able to learn from that over the coming weeks and months. Obviously, it's a backlog to get rid of, first of all, and it's possibly not the ideal time. I know measures are being taken and people put in place in order to be able to try and address where the hold-ups are, what the issues are. But I do think that it's something that we need to be on top of, because there's going to be a lot of different amalgamation of services and amalgamating data. And a lot of this involves an awful lot of data input by an awful lot of people. The number of inputs that are having to be made to set up this new Horizon system. And obviously the information we get out is only as good as the information put in the first place. And I think this is an area we have to be right on top of as a committee, not just in terms of value for money, but also effectiveness, overall quality control job on this one. I don't want to go into Horizon in detail tonight. I don't think it's the place to do it, but I think it's something we've really got to keep our eyes on.
I mean, I think I would personally register an interest in knowing the full story of Horizon. It's just been something that's been there and talked about, but I think we're all seeing the impact of within the planning team of the introduction of this. And I don't know if that's a function of IT or a function of the decision to go for this particular system, but you know, the IT bit we're being told is finished, but to me the impact within planning is quite serious, and to see the pre-application advice service completely suspended for a quarter, which is an income stream to us, I feel we're not getting the information that we need about, you know, what's going on in planning, and the extent to which it's an IT issue or a strategic issue in terms of the decision that has been made, or an implementation issue. At some point, I think we need to know that. And I don't know if it's this committee or the Environment Committee, but I think some sort of report would be potentially useful. If anyone else has any thoughts on that?
I agree.
Councillor Hyman?
I have been looking into this and speaking to people over the past week or so, and it's far too much to cover tonight within this meeting. It's a very wide-ranging subject, and obviously there are related issues, wider issues in planning in this council, which need to be addressed at the same time. I mean, I'm doing 3 appeal hearings at the moment, where the information that's going forward to the appeal hearings from this council is inexcusable, and we need some investigations into what's going on actually. But this isn't the place to do it here tonight.
Do we want to put it onto the work programme as something to bring forward?
That's more like police investigations, frankly. No, it's not for us, not in our work programme so much, I don't think.
Fine, we should leave it in abeyance for the time being then. Any other comments?
We're going to move on to finance and property investment KPIs.
Unless anyone else wanted to mention anything on business transformation, yes. Overall, these are more in line with what we would expect, I think, but any other questions or observations?
Only that we've got an item on it anyway, on RCT anyway, coming up. So anything else do you want to find about?
And policy and governance similarly is covered in the RCT feedback, but anything in the actual report itself?
Chairman, under A, finance and property, it was a reference to securing expertise and capacity from Reigate and Banstead Council, assist with collection of council tax. And we have a little detail as to what that actually involved. If it's something we're going to need in the future, or was it a temporary provision of assistance?
Could Peter Vickers deal with that question, please?
Certainly, Chairman. So we engage Reigate and Banstead as a way of increasing our capacity within the team entering into COVID, but also to give us the business resilience, because the options we had were to go out for temps, agency staff, which were notoriously difficult to get, and the quality can be quite varied on what we have, which puts additional pressure on the team and the team supervision and management. Or we could engage in a other local authority in a collaboration, which would enable us to engage a team that has got the capacity, because they Reigate and Banstead have geared up for several years to take on additional work. They've been quite proactive in that way. So we engaged them. We've done it on a rolling 1-year contract with the intention in the MTFP of just covering 4 years to get us through the pandemic. We know through our collection rates, which are part of the performance report, that there has been a dip in our ability to collect for a number of reasons. Predominantly, people are feeling under financial pressure, businesses and council taxpayers. But also we haven't had access to the full process for over a year now in terms of our ability to collect council tax and business rates. And understandably so, from where the country is at the moment. You can see that there's a table in the report in front of you showing that we've spent £35 million supporting people and businesses across the borough. So that does tie into the pressure that the revenues team is under to maintain the income stream, which is a significant income stream to Waverley. We rely on just over £10 million worth of council tax just for ourselves, never mind Surrey and the police take from council tax, and also the £36 million a year that gets raised through business rates. So there's a significant administrative pressure there at the moment. Reigate's been a great success in terms of accessing a team very seamlessly. You wouldn't know that you're not dealing with Waverley. They are acting on our behalf. So it's very smoothly geared to reflect the fact that they're Waverley, they're working under our protocols and standards. And it really is working well at the moment. And I envisage it being successful throughout the period that we will be engaging in. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yep, thank you.
Can I just ask Peter, if there's a shortfall in our council tax collection, so you know at the end of 2021, 2.5% of our council tax was uncollected. Does the pain of that get spread evenly across all the recipients of council tax, or does Surrey and the police get their full whack and we absorb all of that shortfall?
So we don't absorb all of it. We absorb the deficit in proportion to the preceptors of the actual tax. So it's Surrey, the police, and Waverley. We absorb the town and parish element of that, which is fairly small, but it still would be a minor impact to Waverley. But that's the way it is, the way it's done.
Thank you. Any other observations on finance and property? Right, policy and governance. Anyone have any observations on that section? Good. I see no nods. In that case, we'll move very rapidly on to agenda item 11, which is agenda item 10, which is the recovery training and transformation project evaluation, where I think Debbie Smith's going to present this section of the report to us.
Hello, Chairman, members. Yes, so this is a project or programme close report for the Recovery, Change and Transformation programme. So just a quick summary, really. The RCT projects were set up in April 2020 just to focus on the recovery element of the COVID-19 pandemic when the emergency situation was starting to abate, although we were still quite in the midst of it in some ways as well. But we could see the need for a work stream to pull together the strands of work to help form our new normal that we knew we would need to build. So we pulled together the programme and we had 10 projects which are listed in your papers. All of those projects have now been closed by March 2021, as the work I've identified from them was either completed or we've assimilated it into the new service plans or business as usual. So we want to reflect on the programme and lessons learned. So at programme close, we could see the project process had brought clarity and structure to a council-wide response that could otherwise have been haphazard and mixed. So at the start of the programme, all projects completed a SWOT analysis with their portfolio holders. and a project initiation document which agreed objectives and timelines. Although I don't think any of us could have foreseen the length of time we still need to be responding to the situation and working in the way that we are at the moment, or still have been. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of points on each of the reports very, very quickly, and then just take some questions. So just to note, of the service plans report, there's a red element on there because we hadn't, at the point of project close, actually agreed the service plans, but now those are all resolved and approved. On the people and staff project, just to note that the return to office working policy is still ongoing for the officers in terms of coming into the berries, and although that project is closed, that element is being monitored and reviewed by the Where Work Happens project, as David mentioned earlier, led by Business Transformation. So although that work is carrying on, it's in Business Transformation project now. For corporate projects, just to note the £480,000 savings that were made and contributed to the 2020-21 budget. And then skipping on to finance, just to note those figures were part of the medium-term financial plan and the emergency budget that has all been approved in the council meetings at the relevant times. So the work that the programme did just supported that larger, huge piece of work. And just to note that the other projects, the Agile Working and Future Office Requirements, Business Transformation projects continue now into Where Work Happens and the Berries Development Project, so they are ongoing. As we've noted, we've got economic recovery on the agenda, and housing and community projects don't come to this committee. So they are the 10 projects, and really, so any observations or comments to support those lessons learned going forward that we've had from that programme. Thank you, Chair.
I found the notes on pages 45 onwards, which are sort of look at the programme end and lessons learned, particularly useful. It would be a tragedy if we didn't learn from all of the experiences of the last 12 months. We've not, as councillors, seen them all firsthand, but I think we can guess at some of them. So I don't know if anyone wanted to particularly reflect on anything that's in, as I say, particularly those final pages 46 to 50.
I think if one could just highlight page 50, which is the top box, lessons learned. Starts off by saying there's an opportunity to discuss interfacing projects. I think that surprised me that interfacing projects wasn't part of the structure. It always was when I was back in systems. It's interfacing projects was always an element of any project in there. Perhaps if we could just explain what they mean by that. Is that just a standard interface, or was this something particular that's unique to us?
Chair, I think it was relation to the business transformation projects that were already ongoing, because we were looking at kind of the office space before the pandemic hit, and how that would, reducing the size of the office space at the Berries, and the agile working element of the project was also being looked at already by business transformation. So, but the RCT kind of picked those up because those things were kind of kick-started and put right to the forefront of everyone's minds as we all went, 100% working at home where we could. So we did consider that at the beginning, but we did get a little bit sticky, at some points about where those things kind of lay. And we actually halfway through kind of resolved to move them back into business transformation and just kind of talk to each other rather than have two separate boards. So it's just that lessons learned really and we do on our PID have a interfacing project section. So I think we just need to highlight that for the future to make sure that we do carry on doing that and thinking about what's going on already.
Thank you, that explains.
Any other thoughts from the members?
Well, yes,
Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Certainly, I'm slightly concerned. We're being told here, I think, that the RCT programme, well, actually, if we go to page 23, members, where this starts, where we've got the purpose in the summary, and the second paragraph from the bottom on there tells us that the RCT programme has achieved its aim. The impact of COVID-19 has been assimilated into the normal business operation of the council, now exports the business and wider community, and all projects now transfer back into business transformation. So this is the end of RCT. The project's done and over and successful is what we're being told. And that's good to hear. The end of furlough is likely to bring in certain hardships. It's when things really start to hit, when all money being given away by the government is no longer coming through. There are backlogs and delays within the council on various issues which we have to accept to do what we can about, but are those going to get worse? Should we be readying ourselves for things becoming far worse as furloughs end and hardship for the people out there, the people we serve, really starts to hit home? We have, it says at the bottom of page 24, we've got within our departments, finance supported, helped out with business grants and community services. We're playing a huge role to support individuals and families in urgent need, and that's great. We know that potentially for the individual people being held up was immense benefit to them. But we as a committee, our remit is to look at the cost, the cumulative cost of what went on, and improve our systems for next time if that's necessary. I think that's what we're here for. To make sure that if this was a very expensive way of serving a few people extremely well, and we can do it better next time, and we can approach things better. We didn't see this coming. Nobody's at fault for that. We must be looking at the value for money from that. And what I have difficulty seeing throughout this report is where the value for money is even broached at all. Where, how much money we have spent doing what over the past year, what our staff have been doing, what we as councillors have been doing, what the council has been doing, spending money. We see details of the leisure centre stuff over the year coming to the budget, but we're not looking at all at value for money in the way that we've actually been approaching it. And I don't see any lessons learned from it, which worries me slightly. I'm pleased to see the individual reports from each of the departments. They don't tell me a great deal. I don't know what other members have seen from those. But when we come to the governance issues here, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, we are now sat in a meeting where somebody's decided that we're not going to have any officers in front of us. We're going to sit in this room where I can't see anything or whatever, or the camera behind me permanently, and I'm within distances of people, and other people are turning up to meetings because they have concerns that things might get passed on to other people, even if we're all double jabbed ourselves. I am very concerned about governance. We've almost got a governance crisis that everybody's turning a blind eye to, from what I can see, and from the appeals that I'm sort of participating in at the moment.
I mean, I think we're jumping around a number of issues there, Councillor Hyman. I wouldn't expect to see specific financial information in a report of this type, because we get financial reports in other formats. There is a commentary in the actual lessons learned on page 46 with regard to the financial impact. And I don't think it's realistic to expect anything more than that in here.
Chairman, but where I was leading to, thank you, was when we get to the end of this report at page 50.
Yes.
Yeah, that's where the lessons learnt bit comes in. But that's the bit we should ought to be looking at. The second paragraph tells us that there was some confusion with the system, and then the third paragraph, when I read that, starts to confuse me completely as to where the confusion, how we're going to overcome the confusion in the future, because obviously we have still got to take care of all the major issues that are going to be fallout from COVID and look at how we are going to improve things. I don't see anything in there, I don't know whether you can, but within that lessons learned there, I really don't see anything meaningful that we've learned. And that disappoints me, to have a whole report that tells me these are all lessons learned from everything we've done over the past year, and it's not really telling me anything that I find to be of any great use or insight. Then we move over to the handover roles and responsibilities below. We're looking at number one, we can continue to make provision for staff to work from home, etc., etc. Number 5, training of chairs for hybrid meetings, should this be allowed? It's a question, I think. And number 6, the continued communication around how we work during this period of uncertainty, whilst there's still COVID around, and communication about programme close and where the learning from the projects is going to feed in. And I'm just wondering what follows this so that I've learned something. Madam Chairman, thank you.
Debbie, have you any comments on that?
Well, I think certainly for the financial elements, anything we would refer to the MTFP and the budget strategies as suggested, and any issues around the governance I'd refer to Robin. In terms of the handover roles and responsibilities, obviously some of these things haven't been able to be allowed, but we wanted to put in a recommendation should they be. And the individual projects do have actions and resultant kind of ongoing actions for people to pick up from and lessons learned. And I would say as the programme manager in the council, as we set up new projects, we are thinking about this and building lessons learned into startups. So yeah, apologies if you don't think it's got that so much lessons learned for you, but I think from an officer's point of view, we are building these lessons learned into our project processes.
Chairman, if I just come in, I think there's excellent material in here. I mean, I think one of the things that Councillor Hyman made reference to was actually there's 2 or 3 paragraphs in there around the interface issue, which was actually addressed. I mean, that's on page 50, and it goes into it in more detail. It's one that particularly was of interest to me, having had problems with interface projects before, but I think the individual bits were extremely illuminating for me as a councillor. I learned a lot from them. I'm also encouraged with the way we've transformed our project management, because if I go back 2 or 3 years, there was great concern over it. And I think this from my point of view, this is excellent work. I really would like to commend it.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. I also found some of the individual, more detailed lessons learned sections interesting. I think it's difficult to pull them together because the general themes, of necessity are general. But I do think there is evidence of hard work in there.
I mean,
Councillor Mulliner.
My comment is that I've always felt that officers were very good at business as usual and in dealing with what I call planned emergencies, which flood resilience was one of the best, because you go back 4 or 5 years, perhaps a little bit longer, where we didn't have as good a system as it has now, but some wet winters made it important that this happened. And I regard the whole COVID thing as really the first time when the council's been challenged with something it had never seen before. And I wouldn't expect perfection first time round. If, and I hope we don't have it, something similar like this happened again, I would expect the council to be able to draw on these experiences to be more accurate in its response. This was very much a learning experience, because everyone was flung into a completely unnatural environment. I think working from home is something which probably has worked better in many respects than people thought. And indeed, living in Hazelmere and seeing the complete absence of cars and the commuter car parks makes you wonder what the future holds there. But certainly, I just regard this as the most unexpected thing in the 20 odd years, I've been some sort of councillor. I think on the whole, the council responded well, and these lesson learned comments mean that things have been learned, which will be taken forward. But in many ways, one hopes they'll be taken forward to benefit business as usual. We won't have to face this sort of crisis again in our own lifetimes. But that may be rather optimistic.
I mean, I particularly was interested in the comments on page 33 about business continuity and the fact that there is much that should have been learned to feed into future business continuity planning and possibly also testing, because that is a lot of where the lessons need to be reflected.
Yes, but we had to play all this by ear as we went along, didn't we?
Yeah.
And I think it's been done brilliantly, personally. We could have made a right mess of this, but we haven't. And you know, the council officers is really be commended for this, because they work jolly hard, whether they're at home or here. And you know, we've kept the council going, and it's still in reasonable shape financially as well.
My traffic lights are the post back I get. And I must say that our balance has been very positive over the last 12 months, and extremely positive for some of the business communities in terms of how we've handled some of the grants. I mean, I'm sure that I see some of our business continuity planning of the past, which I've been involved in, coming to fruition during the last 12 months. If we hadn't been quite up to speed, then I don't think we would have handled it as well. The working from home, I think nobody anticipated such a shift in such a short space of time.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've been involved in business continuity plans most of my working life. I've seen alternative accommodation plans and everything. But the one that we've never really implemented is sending everyone home.
Yeah.
But this here, and it came, and we cope with it. And a lot of that was down to the IT and down to the pure project management. And I do think that despite the success, the team has put down in here issues that should be passed over at the end. So I'm actually encouraged by this in terms of Waverley's ability to cope.
Chairman, the Chief Executive has his hand up.
Tom, would you like to let us have your thoughts?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I very much welcome the comments of the committee, the very positive ones. Thank you very much, and indeed the constructive criticism as well, because there's a lot to learn from this. I think what we've been talking about is really a set of specific projects and structures that we had to put in place at a time of crisis when we had to reconfigure the whole of the structure of the whole council and redeploy dozens of staff to doing things that weren't part of their day job. Where we are now, of course, is that COVID is still with us. The social and economic consequences of COVID will be with us for some considerable time to come. And that's why it's very important to mainstream our COVID response into the work of the business. It cannot now be a separate strand that runs alongside of the rest of the business. It has to be very much at the heart of the business. And I do very much agree with the comments that some of you have made about how actually to some extent the work, particularly for district councils and borough councils, is only just beginning, because we're the ones who bear the brunt when there is economic problem and difficulty and crisis in our communities. So the pandemic that hopefully we're coming out of from a medical point of view, although that's still not 100% certain, that nevertheless the long tail, the economic tail, the social and community impact is something that this council is going to have to deal with very robustly over the next few years. And this is in a time of quite considerable challenge against ourselves from the funding policies of successive governments, but particularly now. So the funding challenge that we discussed a year or so ago, or 15 months ago, has been compounded, and you've seen some of the consequences of that. You've set a revised budget. During the course of last year, you set a new budget that includes further challenge, and the next 2 years are going to be even more difficult. However, I suppose what I'm really heartened by is just the amount of dedication and commitment that our staff have showed, and indeed that our councillors have shown, and that our community has shown. So Although there are huge challenges to come while we continue to work with this, we're, I hope, in a good position to try and meet those challenges. So thank you for letting me add some reflections.
Councillor Hyman.
Just to finish, yes, if I may, if we go to, we're on page 39, I think, or that was mentioned last, which is about governance. If you look in the top box there, the third box down, which says reconvene and complete the existing governance review. This is one of the reasons I said I was confused by this and not exactly sure where it's taking us and what it's telling me. It says we're going to reconvene and complete the existing governance review, taking into account of how things changed in terms of both governance and culture as a result of the pandemic. And then this may also take account of governance change required as a result of other recovery work streams. I was quite sure that we were just told within the past couple of weeks that that's not what we're doing, that we're not going to reconvene and complete the existing governance review.
In what sense? I mean, I know there's governance work ongoing in standards.
Well, there was a governance, board or committee, whatever it was, a working group or something, set up 2 years ago, and we had 2 or 3 meetings, and then it stopped and didn't go anywhere. And this is telling us, I think, that the existing governance review is going to be reconvened and whatever. And I thought we'd just been told recently that it isn't. So I'm getting slightly confused as to where we are headed and what is being done in respect of governance. It seems to have been one thing that's gone out the window during COVID, and I went back.
Robin or Debbie, have you got an answer on that, or do we need Robin's input?
I think that'll be for me to answer. I think probably. I have to say that I don't recognise the references to a governance crisis that have been made. I would ask that if comments like that are going to be made, that they be unpacked. In terms of the reference to the governance review working group, then that was the previous way that governance changes were being approached. Councillor Hyman's quite correct that we're doing it a different way, and that's already come through full council. So there are different ways for members to get involved in that.
I think, Chairman, we've had the governance proposals to modify overview and scrutiny, and that's now going to the Standards Committee, where it will get a very thorough discussion. I have no doubt at all, because there are those of us who are concerned about the effect on the level of scrutiny and the amount of detail that the new committees will be able to go into. One must always remember that scrutiny, for much of the time, doesn't have to do anything dramatic, because there's nothing very dramatic to comment on. But from time to time, something very serious does happen. And then you have to have the committees available to make some quite searching inquiries into it, make some quite strong comments. So I'm certainly hopeful that Standards will take on board those sorts of concerns.
I mean, I think going back to Councillor Hyman's comments, the reconvening and completion happened prior to the last reports that went to council. But I don't think we can go into much more of the detail of this. I think overall the feeling is that there has been an awful lot of unscheduled work from which the council and the community have gained. As an overall comment, I think that's fair, despite Councillor Hyman's reservations on specific parts of it. So everyone...
Absolutely, but I think you're mistaken in your understanding there, because it says reconvene and complete the existing review. That's not going to be done. It hasn't been done.
Because the whole purpose of this is to summarise the project that was undertaken during the year, not the way forward from here.
Yes.
The way forward from here is it's in business as usual.
Absolutely. I am slightly concerned about, I do not want, if there are any members of the public who we serve, the people we serve, who are, keep an eye on what's going on in our meetings. We're watching last Tuesday's Western Planning meeting with the IT and how that was handled. And at the bottom of this page, so issues of connectivity and IT equipment for members and ability staff to present. I mean, that's something which is still ongoing. And as long as we're going to be having hybrid meetings or meetings where we're taking part remotely, then these things are going to appear. You know, we do have enormous problems with hearing people and people being able to connect and stay and doing things properly over remote meetings. And there are still issues. And I certainly wouldn't want people to think that I was allowing this to go by, saying that everything's hunky-dory and everything's perfect. It isn't. We're here as a scrutiny committee, not a slap on the back and say everything wonderful that we can think of.
No, I take that point entirely, and I think, though, that the purpose of this report is to report on the closure of the project, not the closure of the issues. The issues remain, they just need to be handled in a different way. Councillor Gray.
I think the focus of this project was governance changes that needed to be done as a result of COVID. I think when you get to the end, it's saying any of the outstanding governance issues will be passed over for business as usual. It's not talking necessarily about the governance issue that Councillor Hyman's raising.
Yes.
And if you look at the work stream, you'll see you talk about it. How do we handle meetings? How do we handle audit? How do we handle planning? And this council moved from being in a state of suspension to its temporary measure in a very short order. And that involved a lot of IT, a lot of restructuring, and a lot of governance issues had to be resolved.
And just 600 other councils did the same.
Well, they may have done, Mr. Hyman, but this is our report here. And I'm not trying to diminish your concerns about the issues you raised, but this report is about the governance process within that pandemic. We've set up the ability to do hybrid. We may not be perfect about it, but we've set up the processes, and now democratic services can take that over, and that's all it's saying in here.
I think we've exhausted the time we can allow to this issue. I think our recommendation for this item was that we note the closure of the project and therefore the overall programme, and pass any comments and observations to the executive. Do we have any specific comments and observations to make other than that we note that there is a commitment to learning the lessons and returning to business as usual? Thank you. Next item is the economic development strategy, and I'm not sure whether Zach's presenting this or is it Catherine?
Thank you, Chairman. If I could just do a brief introduction, then I will bring Catherine in for some of the more detailed elements. So, yes, we were asked to give an update on economic development strategy. I was a little bit confused because we've been talking quite some time about the pandemic, obviously, and the impacts of that. And we took a conscious decision under the recovery work stream that you were just talking about, that we've closed down now and moved into sort of the service plan areas. One of those areas was economic development and our support to local businesses through and the local economy. And so we actually suspended work on when I joined, we were going to do a review of the economic development strategy that was adopted in 2018, and a copy of that is included in the papers. So that's just for reference. So apologies for any confusion as to why that's included there, but it's to give you reference of where we were at that stage when it was adopted under the previous administration. And so we sort of took a conscious decision last April, I guess it must have been, to focus on recovery from the pandemic, knowing that a lot of businesses would be hit hard by COVID and there would be immediate short-term measures that we would need to support them with, medium-term sort of measures in terms of returning to the high street and returning to sort of the new normal, and then longer term strategic aims, utilising some of the funding streams coming through central government. So if you turn to page, I think it's 143 of the agenda, or is it 137? Sorry, 137. We do have the COVID action plan that's been approved by executive. And effectively that sets out sort of our work programme from October 2020 to October 2021. Now, I appreciate from my previous discussions with the chairman, who's not here tonight, that you were rather hoping to have an update on where we are with the new economic strategy and how we are sort of reviewing that. But as set out in the service plans, and I think those went through ONS March time, as set out in there, we've deliberately decided that we will start work on the new economic development strategy in November this year, because our focus at the moment with a small team is on the COVID action plan as set out within the agenda. If Catherine doesn't mind, I will bring her in just to sort of talk about some of the actions that we've put forward through that and what we're working on at the moment, particularly in terms of some of the sort of the funding streams that we've received from government, and we're working forward with strategic goals. But just to say that, very much from November this year, our intention is to start working on a new sort of hopefully in the new economic development strategy in a more hopefully a more normal environment, and certainly that would be when we start to look at things like business improvement districts and some of the sort of more strategic longer term aims that we had. But as I say, make no apologies for the fact that we've had to sort of turn our attention to immediate goals from recovering from the pandemic. So if Catherine, you don't mind, I'll bring you in there. We do have our portfolio holder for economic development, Elizabeth Townsend's on the Zoom as well tonight. So I don't know if she would want to say anything through you, Chairman, if that was permitted. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Catherine, please.
So I don't know if you've had a chance to have a look at the COVID action plan, and as has been mentioned by Peter earlier on, the pandemic has been massive for a large number of businesses in Waverley. We've got about 8,000 businesses in the area. We needed to get access to all of their contact details. So there's been quite a considerable amount of government funding that's come through, whether that's direct business grants or via the ERDF funding, a reopening high streets fund. So for example, Waverley was allocated 111,000, and we worked with the main towns and villages to distribute that and work on signage, on pedestrianisation, to support the businesses in October. And there's been another tranche of 111,000 coming from government to spend this year. So we purchased the FAME database, which gives us information on all of the businesses locally, and that business intelligence will be disseminated, and that will work towards the strategy later in the year. The government also allowed Waverley to top slice some money from the additional restrictions grants. I don't know if you've been made aware of those. We've got our business newsletter that goes out almost weekly, bi-weekly throughout the COVID period. And within that, we will have monies to support key sectors that have been identified as hard hit, and also businesses wanting to diversify and design their business. They might have had to close, as you're well aware. Certain sectors have been extremely hard hit, such as events, hospitality. So we've got a lot of work there going on, just about to start. So we'll be sending out information on some key projects there, including hybrid business events for some of our hotels and attractions in the area. We'll be looking at the gaming sector, supporting the film sector, looking at connectivity that's mentioned in the action plan. That's been something that's been fundamentally important. As we've mentioned this evening, can people work from home remotely and speak to their colleagues, work on Zoom and what have you? So there's lots of different streams within the action plan. We've got a business contract with Enterprise South and Enterprise First. So they've been offering free business support for any business that's wanted it. And we've been signposting to different partners throughout the last year. I don't know if there are any questions on the action plan or the plans for refreshing the strategy, looking at sustainability in particular, encouraging green businesses to the area and businesses to become more local, I suppose, working with local supply structures.
Councillor Mulliner.
Yeah, page 149, item 15, improving communications. You've got a date of the end of this month, the delivery and approval, Waverley strategy for broadband connectivity. Delivery and approval of the 5G strategy for Waverley by the same date, 21st of May. Is that on track?
So the date at the end of May is not on track. We're talking to the University of Surrey and their 5G Innovation Centre, getting some advice from them. We're working with the local enterprise partnership EM3 LEP about a fibre spine that they're investing in between Basingstoke and Guildford, and we're funding some feasibility studies on spurs into Farnham and also down into the Dunsfold area and Cranley. So we're looking to get some expertise on connectivity to bring all of this together, working with the University of Surrey. So that's something we met with the university last week, and we are looking with Surrey County Council and their connectivity officers.
So what date should be regarded as feasible to replace 31st of May?
I would estimate 2 to 3 months. We would want to have an expert brought in. He's got lots of telecommunication experience. I know it's something, for example, in the east of the borough, the MP has worked hard in the past to try and get private providers on board. They haven't been interested, it's not commercially viable. So how can we attract them to improve the telephone signal in Cranley, for example? You've got private companies moving in, like Swish coming into Farnham, so they know it's profitable for them, but how can we join all that together and make it work for people working from home, which is going to be continuing, and then also the businesses, especially in rural areas, that are going to need good connectivity.
So are you actually saying that you hope to have the delivery and approval of these strategies by the end of August?
We won't have approval, but we've got an outline and we're talking to partners, but it is something that we want to achieve sooner rather than later.
I appreciate that, obviously. But I mean, given that particular dates were put in, 31st of May is obviously next week, can you give a realistic replacement date when you get delivery and approval of these strategies? We're talking, in reality, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years?
Okay. If I may, through you, Chairman, we're working with an economic development team of 1.4 officers at the moment. So Catherine and Jill, who works 2 days a week. We will be reliant on external consultants, as Catherine said, for some of these projects. The funding for that has been agreed through the additional restriction grants monies. So you may be aware that the council has been awarded, well, initially 2.5 million, with potentially another 1.2 million to come if we can demonstrate we've spent the first tranche and second tranche monies. And those monies would then, what we're proposing to do is ring fence £500,000, which was 20% of the original monies, to business support activities, so strategic activities such as those set out in the action plan. So I totally agree that actually some of these dates do need to be refreshed, and actually getting the strategy approved through whatever mechanism, whether it needs to go through ONS and then executive, is likely to add a couple of months on. So realistically, I think we are probably talking 6 months in regards to the communications strategy, which would take us towards sort of November this year, October, November this year.
So if we were to say end of calendar 2021, that would give you...
That would be realistic. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we've done the spec. We do need to do the procurement, but the business case and the spec has been drawn up for taking that out in terms of getting a consultant in. So hopefully that we can move forward with that. But that may be the case for some of the others elements. And I think it's important to recognise that in defence of Catherine and Jill, they're working to try and to deliver an action plan with quite limited resources at the moment, and that's why these additional restriction grants monies are very welcomed. But as I say, we only got approval for them on the 30th of March of this year through executive. and actually we're spending the ARG monies at the moment on direct business grants on the basis that we can ring fence £500,000 from the next tranche of monies that we expect to be forthcoming, I think in June, July, something like that.
Can I make some observations, if I may, just on the report that we have in here? And there's a column at the end of additional funding, but to me, the numbers entered in there, I'm looking at pages 145 to 149. In some places, there are numbers mentioned, but I can't visualize what those numbers relate to, whether there's money that's been spent by Waverley, money that Waverley is intending to spend, and what are the deliverables for that money. And I think as a method of presenting information, I prefer to see what we're spending money on and where we're going to deliver value from that money. And I found these numbers particularly difficult to understand whether they're proposals that we spend it or that we've already spent it and what we're getting for it. So I did find this section difficult to follow from that perspective. And I think it is hugely important. And I also think I would love just an acronym sheet to sit alongside this, because I'm sorry, I don't know what a lot of these acronyms mean. So I did struggle with this report, and I do want to be positive about it because it's a hugely important piece of work. And in the context of what you were just saying about our limited resources, there's reference to an additional officer to be funded through Surrey County Council rebates. I don't understand that reference. If we can get some extra staff paid for by someone else, I would have thought sooner rather than later, please. But you know, is that then just a contract position while the funding lasts? I'm really not sure that I understand enough of this to make meaningful comments.
Can I supplement to yours? I'm struggling to understand the status of this report. Was this report drafted for us? I'm very conscious that Zach said he's got a very small team there, and actually reports and update takes resource.
Yes, it does.
They've done a tremendous amount of visible external reports, but if we could have added to your comments, what was the status of this? When it was at last updated? When will it next be updated? That would help me to.
Yeah, I think that's fair comment as well, Councillor Bryn.
Yeah, if I may, Chairman. Yeah, I mean it's an action plan for our internal use to guide our essential work to recover from the COVID pandemic in terms of economic recovery. It wasn't specifically intended to be a report to an ONS committee or executive. Of course, if it had been, certainly we would put that additional information in. But I do take your point about understanding which of these are spent, which of these are already committed, and which of these are still to be spent. What I'd say on that is it is meant to be a living document, and it will need refreshing soon. I mean, whether or not you'd want us to come back perhaps with a slightly more detailed sort of update on each of the actions, what's been spent, etc. So the next ONS committee, that's something we could certainly do if members would find that helpful. I know the chairman was slightly more interested in the longer term ambitions in terms of where we go to in terms of post November, but certainly certainly you're right to ask the questions. Yeah, and finally, just on the point about the Surrey sort of rebate, that was basically Empty Homes grant. I mean, I don't know the full detail, but Surrey did effectively, there was some money that was due back to be returned back to the council, and so we had to put in bids for how we would spend that money and what we would use it for, and one of those areas was in terms of support to economic development. It's slightly morphed into more sort of managing the projects to take them forward, project management. And perhaps Debbie, I see Debbie, do you mind? I see you nodding. Perhaps Debbie could just confirm where we are with that, because we're looking to recruit to a temporary position, as I understand.
Yeah, so we're hoping be able to move forward very quickly and extend a contract so that we can support economic development in the administration of the Welcome Back Fund, which is the second fund, the 110,000 that Catherine was been talking about. And then moving forward, they would take a more project focused role and potentially probably the summer, hopefully have time to have recruited for a full-time position. So that was just agreed at Management Board last week, and we're taking next steps as soon as we can to get that position filled.
Nancy, going back to Zach's comment that a further report could be produced, and also I'm with Councillor Gray, producing reports is a distraction. And we have to question what value we would get from it. I mean, I question the value we've got from looking at the information as it's available today, because it's not being produced for us. We don't know, what status it is, where we can have input. So I think it's interesting. I'm delighted to see all of the activity that's going on. But do we want another report, or do we want to have an early look at the next generation of strategy when it's being prepared for business as usual? Councillor Hyman.
I think you're right that there may be limited benefit to get into this further and to dig deeper. If I can refer you back to page 138, Madam Chairman, to the very top of page 138, where we've got the targets and measures in the existing, or what you might call past, Economic Development Action Plan, although it's meant to continue further. It says the very first target, number 1, was to increase the share of Waverley Borough Council contracts awarded to local businesses by 5% by 2010. I assume that's a typo, and then in the middle of the next one, calculate the local infrastructure project investment by 2020. And once I got past that, I thought, I'm not really going to spend a lot of time getting into the detail of this, because I know I'm being silly.
No, because it clearly was a document produced pre-COVID, and that's why I rushed on to the final page.
Absolutely. So we move on to the final report that we've got, which is the COVID action plan, Madam Chairman. My eye on the clock there. I am concerned on page 144, the very last line, tells us that what we're going to be doing is guided by the RCT group in consultation with the executive and ONS. But we've just been told in the previous item that the RCT group no longer exists, haven't we? Or that project's finished. So I'm not entirely sure how that sits. So just an explanation of where that might be going forward. If we just need to change RCT to business transformation or whatever. But it seems to be contradictory to what we've just been told. And then talking about the money itself, you, Madam Chairman, referred on page 147, the right-hand column, talking about this money appears, but we don't know what it's actually telling us. I think the right-hand column there tells us that it's cost £5,000 for businesses to join Enterprise South, or £2,000 per annum for Business South membership, and we're encouraging businesses to join those. I don't think it's us. No.
Can I just clarify, that's our membership fees for Business South and Enterprise, Business South membership and Enterprise South. So that's our membership that gives us the benefit in terms, as I understand it, in terms of getting access to their programs and innovations and their documents, etc. So, but you're quite right about the point about the RCT. Obviously, when this was drafted, the intention was that the RCT group would, and as I say, this wasn't a report produced for this meeting, it was a report produced quite some time ago, but at that time it was intended that the RCT group would take this forward, and that's how we would govern it. But obviously that's since been ceased. So you're quite right, we do need to identify in our next iteration of this where that would be, would that be governed, yeah.
Councillor Davidson, please.
Solidly, never mind.
I don't know who you are.
I know you know. Yeah, basically, I think reports should be relatively small and they should communicate. It's all about communication. Like officers need to know, and I think they do, they should know what sort of questions we're going to ask, what things we want to know, because they've got to do their job. And if people write law
a random report, which I'm sure I've done a lot of information, it may not be most relevant to what we want, and that takes from their job, and there's pressure on them. So it's a matter of balance.
I think I'd like to just make an observation on point 1 on page 138. And this is really a general observation that I find in a lot of Waverley documents, that a statement's been made that is meaningless to the reader. I think it's an excellent objective that Waverley Borough Council awards its contracts to local businesses, but it's a 5% increase from what to what? Are we measuring that by value, or are we measuring it by volume? To be honest, time has been spent producing a statement that means nothing to us as the reader. And I mean, I was told a long time ago, write something and then walk around to the other side of the desk and see if it makes sense to a reader who knows nothing about it. And I do think there are an awful lot of examples of that in these documents.
Could I just clarify, is that the original document?
Yes.
Yes.
So, I mean, we really should ignore that.
We ignore it as a specific, but as a general comment, it's a bit like version control.
Yeah, so when the new plan comes through, the warning is be specific and make sure it's relevant.
Yes, and it's going to make sense to the readers.
Thank you.
I bear not the scars, that would be the wrong word, but Councillor Seaborn and I actually dived into this because the first draft of the main text summed from exactly what you said. We couldn't understand what it's getting at. So we offered our services as a sort of drafting subcommittee and made fairly extensive contributions. I mean, these things are, in some senses, heroic documents. They cover so much data, all of which has got to be updated. There's a reference to Brexit in there, which now brings back happy memories before anything actually happened. The whole thing's got to be completely redone, and Zach's people are going to be very busy doing it. But I think the point you've made, that everything needs to be checked for sheer. This is where actually scrutiny committees come in, because we can read these things and say, hang on, we haven't a clue. And one of the jobs is, I think, they're called task and finish groups. You often give a document like this at a late stage to people who are not connected with its drafting, but could read it and then come up with a list of questions as what does this mean?
Yeah.
And your acronym list is not a very, very good point.
I mean, I think that, looking forward to the role of ONS, it would be to be involved in task and finish groups rather than trying to debate issues at this sort of committee level. I think the production of this is a huge task, and we're not here to be negative or knocked down, but we actually, to be able to add value, we have to have sensible data to read.
Madam Chairman, there are a couple of things which are relevant to us tonight on this, and that's some deadlines which are coming up shortly, according to this, on page 148. 10 at the top, talking about amalgamating business directories, and communications are set to have 200 businesses included in a directory by the 31st of October. And so we can ask, what's the progress on us? Are we going there? There's a reference to 5% CTR, and we previously had references to 4% CTR and CTR for CTR percent. So swapping things around, and I couldn't work out what it meant. I'd like to know. But as respect to those 200 businesses, I mean, I could sit down in the morning, probably go through the phone book and note down 200 businesses from Waverley and put them in a directory. I don't know whether nobody's actually done that. So is this joining or being conscripted to paying to be part of a directory? Is it simply, as I say, just a data entry exercise that we could get a junior onto? And I want to know, are we actually aiming for that still? And further down in the middle, we've got minimum of contact with one commercial agent across the 4 main settlements. Presumably that means each of the 4, rather than just one. That means 4 people we're going to contact by the 31st of October. I'm wondering who's taking on this immense task of phoning up 4 people by the end of October, and how we're doing, how we're getting on with it. What our 4 CTR percent at the end of that paragraph means, frankly, I do agree with the chairman, and I'm just wondering whether you're being very, very pleasant and polite and diplomatic in your approach, and that is slightly hiding the question of to what extent should we be doing this at all?
Can I just say, Chairman, CTR is very clear. It's click-through rate. It's on under item 4 of the action plan. It says click-through rate bracket CTR. It's a very common way of setting out sort of your acronyms and then following them through. But apologies if Councillor Hyman didn't see that.
No, I so 4 click-through rate percent means just that to me then.
Yeah.
Could you explain what a click-through rate is, then, Mr. Toad?
I think we're going into too much detail. I think
if we don't understand the document.
The point is that we do need the acronym list. It isn't fair to expect us to remember something that was in a paragraph 5 pages previously if it's not something we currently work with.
Can I talk about?
Sorry, Catherine.
I was going to say, can I explain about the stay-at-home directory, because it's quite important for local businesses. So during the pandemic, obviously, lots of people couldn't leave their homes. And so we collated a directory on the Waverley corporate site where it was just a list and it said which businesses would deliver, and it was readily used. And then when the corporate site moved over and was redesigned, it became part of the business directory, which is a free directory for any business within Waverley, and you click on the item you want, whether it's food and drink, whether it's medication or what have you. So it's a useful tool to recommend businesses to be part of. So it's on the businesswaverley.co.uk website.
I think the point is there's a lot of background sitting behind this report. I'm not sure that we're gaining any value by going through it in detail. We can see there's a lot of activity. We look forward to seeing the next iteration of the strategy, and we encourage involvement in the drafting of it before it reaches this stage, because I think it's just too much to absorb and debate in this sort of format.
Chairman, you're right. And I think in addition to an acronym list, an explanation of what the terms actually mean to people who are not aged under 50. To be blunt, if you want us to understand what the significance, I mean, is 3% click-through rate terrible and 5% fantastic? Would you have to get to 20% before you think it's fantastic? Or is 1% good? I don't know. These things are foreign to me.
I think we could probably ask for a separate section on that, but I think we have to move on looking at the clock. Councillor Martin will think I'm an appalling chair because he'd had us finished 10 minutes ago. Councillor Marriott.
Sorry. Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a general comment, really. I mean, this is a very broad brush, a very detailed broad brush set of action items for this economic development plan. What it doesn't address is what you might see or what you might require as a vision statement for each of the major towns in our areas. So we've all got similarities, but there's also differences. So what a vision statement for Farnham would be is not what that would be for Cranley. I mean, for example, Farnham is listed as a craft town, which implies that we're looking to encourage visitors to come to the town. So that is covered in here, of course, in a broad brush sense. But what we do to do that is might have more emphasis in certain areas than other towns. So, you know, this is saying the broad brush approach to things.
Yes.
What do we specifically need to address in each of our towns? And that's not covered.
I hope that point's taken forward because I think it's valid.
I'll be as quick as I can. One, let's go back. This was an internal document that's been shared to us to give us an update. It could have perhaps been benefit from having that sort of explanation on it, and there wasn't really a need to put the previous economic plan in our papers because that confused me. I had to read it again.
Yeah.
Secondly, I think, and certainly from my point of view, and being economic on the limited resource that Zach has, if we want to go further, we should go for a briefing, right? And basically allow us to ask some questions on the current, because personally, I've learned some things here tonight I didn't know. which is useful to update me. And third, it's a suggestion is that we ask SAT to produce us a roadmap of how he's going from here to producing the strategy. What are the stages? What are the rough timescales? That would allow us to make through to the chair for you to make an input into terms of where we need to get involved. And hopefully
I take that on board as a good way forward. Thank you, Councillor Gray.
To reduce the amount of work that
Yes.
they've got to do.
Councillor.
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Gray there. Some very good points. I'll make a very brief point, really. It's about, this is on page 101 and page 49 of the report. It's which hit me straight away. It's about buses. So
Sorry,
we talk
which
about
page
the
are you
railway
on?
service, page 49 of the reports and page 101 in the pack.
All right.
And it mentions the railway service is vital for Waverley residents, while the bus service network in and out of Waverley may be important. But I think the answer is to delete may and put in should, because the bus services are very important to link villages with towns. And it's there's a great economic need for people to use buses. Young people don't have cars. And it's a major economic point. And the government
I
will look into this.
take that on board, but this is the document that was adopted in 2018.
Yes, that's right.
And definitely this agenda item missed the normal officer report as to what it was we were being invited to look at and what we were expected to do with it. But can we move on? I like Councillor Gray's suggestions. We've got good body language around the room. If we can have a roadmap and know when we can have meaningful input going forward, please, Sat. Okay, moving on to the next agenda item, which is the workplace profile update. Sally, please.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, councillors. Thank you for inviting me to talk through the workforce profile. This is a standard report that comes annually to this committee, and it reviews the breakdown of our workforce in terms of equality, diversity and inclusion statistics. So it looks at most of the protected characteristics, age, gender and so on. And reviews the data that we have and makes some conclusions there about what's happened over the last year and what that might mean for HR focus in the future. This comes to this committee for noting and particularly for your feedback and for your comments. I would just want to pull out a few highlights really from the report. You'll notice that there's an increasing age in our workforce, and there's a number of implications that might fall out of that. This isn't unusual. The population as a whole and the workforce as a whole in the UK is increasing in its age. So this isn't particular to Waverley, but it does mean that we may want to concentrate on attracting younger staff, reflecting greater specialisms in younger people. We might need to look at the way we recruit younger people. We are currently about to recruit a new cohort of apprentices, and we're looking forward to doing that and welcoming them into Waverley over the next few months. Other areas that the committee may want to consider, there's some information there about our gender pay gap. You'll notice that our gender pay gap is slowly decreasing, which is good news, but there's really very little that is going to change dramatically there until we see women represented at senior management level. So that's something that we're thinking about. When we look at disability, Waverley Borough Council is a disability confident employer. We have a number of areas that we can support people with disabilities, including access to work, occupational health and so on, to make sure that adjustments in the workplace support those with disabilities. One thing we notice with our disability data is that a surprising number of people don't declare that they have a disability. And in fact, this is a focus throughout our equality and diversity data, that a number of people simply choose not to report. This is, of course, their right. People are entitled to personal privacy. They don't need to report this to us. There's no requirement for them to do so. We do like to encourage people to do so, however, and we run regular communication campaigns with employees to try and encourage them to update their data so that it's as accurate as possible. But it does mean that some of our reporting is affected by the fact that a number of people just choose not to report. You'll see there's a section in the report on ethnicity. This has been a huge area for us over the last 12 months. We had a very active response to the Black Lives Matters that happened just a year ago. We started a race equality focus group in response and have been actively supporting through education, calendar events and supporting others. We've just launched an active citizens programme to particularly support those who are from protected characteristics or underrepresented groups, and to prevent and become active allies for those who are from those protected characteristics groups. There's a section in the report that details the impact of COVID. I had a look at our sickness absences earlier this evening just to see how many absences we actually had reported due to COVID. There were 39 absences, of which 16 directly were reactions to vaccines, as opposed to actually being COVID absences. We had at least 2 cases of long COVID. Unfortunately, again, we're somewhat prisoners to our data collection, because early in the pandemic, a lot of people reported flu-like symptoms and chest infections as opposed to COVID. And of course, there wasn't the testing at that time to really have accurate data there. You'll have heard in other topics this evening that we have the return to office working policy, which is still in force. And we are now looking at the Where Work Happens project to see what valuable lessons we can learn from COVID. One of the particular areas of the report that you'll be interested in is our turnover. It's very low at the moment in terms of resignations, which you absolutely would expect. The economy needs stability and people are reluctant to leave stable jobs in the public sector. This isn't something I anticipate continuing. However, I would anticipate that our turnover over the next 12 months is much higher. We do see our turnover much higher at the lower levels in terms of our grades and experience. This is again to be expected. People at lower grades tend to be looking for career changes and progression, which you would expect. Having said that, this sort of brings us into a full circle, because it does indicate to me that there's probably a need to encourage career progression and development amongst our younger in-service people, which would again help younger people to be employed by Waverley and to stay. So that is really the report in a very, very speedy nutshell. I'd take any feedback, questions and comments. I'd really welcome those. Thank you very much, Chair.
Councillor Mulliner.
I'll just make an observation. In my time on Waverley, we've had 2 female chief executives, Christine Pointer and Mary Orton, who were very effective executives. So I think Waverley does have a history of senior women, and I hope that happens again.
Don't fret, Tom. You have protected employment rights.
Thank you. Yes, one thing I would really pick me in this report: 36% of workers are part-time workers. I think that's a very enlightening thing to do. I think women will actually find it difficult to look after home, look after children, and work full time. And I've come from a very male work environment where these things didn't really bother me at all. But then I worked as a part-time for the civil service, and I realised the problems that women have. And I think this is very good. And actually, it's also very good for older workers like myself. I worked on a 3-year part-time programme, and I was happy to do that. So many older people want to do that as well, which is, I'm pleased to see that. The question is, what is is there a standard retirement age? In one time, there was a flexible retirement age, but I noticed there's a number of older workers of 71 plus, and many of us within that category. But having said that, I just wondered, that's not a criticism of the still working, by the way, but I was just wondering how the retirement ages operates now.
So, yes, of course. So in 2010, the Equality Act came in that prevented employers having a statutory retirement age. So you no longer can ask people to retire. I'm sure you're all aware of that. So people can just continue to work as long as they feel able and as long as they can perform. We do encourage flexible working. As the councillor pointed out, we do have flexible retirement options. One thing that the CIPD suggests for an older and ageing workforce is that you do encourage flexibility in your employment. It does tend to retain both older and younger workers, both of whom are looking for flexibility and work-life balance. So any work that we can do to encourage flexibility will help with that retention. In fact, the committee may be interested to know that the majority of people in their 50s who do choose to leave work choose to become self-employed in order to maintain that work-life balance. And of course, the committee will be aware of the need to support ageing parents. We're called the sandwich generation now, aren't we? Because we're sort of squashed between children and looking after parents. So flexibility here for retention is key, and it's something that the HR team are really aware of and are contributing towards the projects that you've heard about this evening to help encourage that flexibility to continue and to grow. In fact, Waverley are particularly good at supporting their part-time workers. The national figure for part-time working is around 24%. So, you can see that we're considerably higher than that.
Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Sally, just one thing, we get these reports in black and white, so when you've got bar charts and things like that that show us the same colour, or the same colour when it's in black and black, that's not entirely helpful. So if we can just take that forward, because some of these I find it very difficult to actually work out what it's telling me. Pleased to see that 64% of our workforce are female. That's a bit unfair to men, male species, I think, that we employ so few men. But I suppose we have to live with unfairness in life like that. On page 160 and 161, we've got, and this is a function of the difficulty that Sally's explained to us in respect of getting people to answer the questions. We have anywhere between 5% and 40% might be disabled, and we just don't know. Because that's what the report tells us. So, and the other report from this is we have somewhere between 2.4% and 26.4% are not white, and we just don't know. So there's an element of, well, why are we just being told if we just don't know? I don't know that that's particularly helpful. I've got a graph on page 164, and I'm not entirely sure which was what year, because we have to get the colours. I think I've worked out which one it is, that mental health issues have rocketed at the end of this year rather than rocketed downwards. Sorry, December, last December rather than the one before, but I'm not sure. There's an implication somewhere. I think the page we concentrate is 166. 166 tells us about the impact of home working, where work happens. And our staff have told us in there, in May 2012, the business transformation team surveyed staff to review the experience of home working. 81% of workers said, well, it doesn't actually, it says this indicated that 81% of workers could do their job to a satisfactory standard at home. And 74% of people believe they're as productive or more productive than working in the office. And 73% wants to work at home in the future, half or most or all of the time. So to me, I think this is data which we might expect to see to be taken forward into actions into how this council operates. And my concern is this is what people tell us, and I would like to know whether there's any evidence available to back up, or what evidence is to back that up in real terms in respect of what we're seeing, what our customers are seeing. Is it true that 81% of workers did their job to a satisfactory standard at home. We simply can't tell, and I don't think that we can really be expected to take staff's word entirely on it, because obviously we'll all say, every single one of us would say that, yeah, we work 5 times as hard, I want 5 times as much pay, please, because I'm really efficient.
I think we've got where you're coming on that, Councillor Hyman.
But it says this survey is now being repeated with listening panels in view to making longer term changes, and I'm really scared that we are going to be going forward with what surveys tell us rather than with what evidence we've got from the from results.
I think Robin Taylor has addressed that issue when it's been raised in a performance report format previously. I wanted to add a concern though, linking some of the things I've observed, the sort of times on emails we get from some officers and the very high proportion of issues we have on mental health. And I do think that there are issues to be observed in that area. I mean, I take the planning list that came out a couple of weeks ago, and that planning spreadsheet is far less user-friendly for us as councillors. I suspect it's a nightmare for fairly junior staff to produce. And if we're moving into an environment where people are working at all pay grades, not just senior pay grades, at their own devices, that we're actually creating stress. And taking Councillor Hyman's point, we don't just want self-certification on this, but I think we don't have the tools available to really monitor how many hours people are putting in to produce the same results and whether that's really good for them as well as good for the council. Robin, I don't know if you wanted to comment on that, or Sally?
I mean, I think the point I would want to make, Chair, is that obviously this report in that paragraph being referred to there is referring to what staff themselves have said about their preferences, but that's only one part of the jigsaw. The other key part is that all team managers are being consulted on their view about how services need to be delivered. So all the way along during the COVID pandemic, it hasn't just been a case of staff preference. It's been a combination of staff preference, what supports staff well-being, what the service needs to deliver. So the combination of home working and office working, yes, of course, we want to try and meet what staff are looking for, because that's part of our recruitment and retention and motivation strategy. But we won't be adopting an approach which doesn't work in terms of delivering services. So there'll be different profiles of home working and office working for different services and indeed for different individuals. So I understand entirely the point that Councillor Hyman's making, but I think I can give some reassurance that we're not just basing the whole strategy on survey results, but those survey results are, one piece of the jigsaw that we'll look at.
Can we have the evidence that supports the survey results or doesn't support it, whatever, but can we please, because I did raise this a year ago, was raising this when we went into COVID, that we do need to be able to show value for money and demonstrate it. And obviously we do expect there to be some records of output compared to previous years. For instance,
Robin,
how much we've done.
Robin is about to answer your question, Councillor Hyman.
I'm happy to reiterate the answer given previously when this was raised, which is that what we're talking about there is performance and the performance management framework in place in the authority. And there are a set of service plans, there is a corporate strategy, and all staff are given objectives and are managed by their line manager according to those objectives. So that is where we look at whether or not performance and productivity is what it should be, rather than looking at presenteeism. But I do agree, Chair, you're absolutely right to draw attention to the question of well-being and the hours that staff are working. And managers are not just looking at whether staff deliver the target set for them, but they are also encouraged to check in with their staff on their well-being. And just to say on Sally's behalf, there's been a huge amount of work done in the past year focusing on staff well-being, and of course a bit more on councillor well-being as well.
I'd like to acknowledge that, and I did want a moment to slip in how particularly impressed I was at the domestic abuse policy that's been published recently. because I think the domestic abuse aspects of working from home is something that we've done well to recognise so quickly. So thank you for that. Councillor Gray.
Thank you. Just a general observation. I think the information is extremely good. You've got a lot of factual information and trends. I would make a general observation that I am concerned about the pressure that Waverley is putting on its staff. We're seeing absentees is coming down, turnover is going down, and that's partly market. But is it also partly the fact that there is a threat environment that we've gone through with business transformation? And I don't mean that threat in terms of threatening people with redundancy, but there is a general need to reduce staff. So those things are coming up. And I think that the question I would have overall is the sustainability that we expect our workforce to achieve over the next 12 months. They've achieved some outstanding results here. What we don't want to do is to pile that pressure on them. We need to find a way of how we step down slightly and build back resilience. We've got the resilience because we had a workforce, we had a crisis, they responded to the crisis. Let's hope we don't get another one too soon, but we should be trying to repair and replace, re-energise some of our workforce.
I think that's a particularly challenging issue, but well worth making the point. Anyone else have any observations on this topic?
One of the voluntary organisations I worked for many, many years, long before we had COVID, we had people working at home for 4 days and then coming in the office for the 5th, usually Friday, but not always, and that day could be moved backwards and forwards. And that worked very, very well indeed. There was no fall off in performance or anything. And I think it's important you need to come into the office on a fairly regular basis to meet your colleagues, not just work-wise, but socially as well. Otherwise you get very isolated, particularly people that live on their own. But this system we've used in this particular area of the voluntary sector is worked brilliantly for probably about 10 years now. You know, if someone ring up and say, can I come in and choose on Tuesday instead of Friday? Yes, fair enough, no problem. But providing you're flexible, it works very, very well indeed. And it saves a small fortune in travelling costs and in time. Virtually everybody was saving at least an hour a day of travelling, some 2 hours. And very often those 2 hours, they're actually at home working, you know. So you've got some buck-she work out of them. They really didn't mind.
I think that's part of the strategy as I've heard it going forward, but it isn't a valuable point. Can we move on then to the final item, I think, on the agenda? Do you want to make any specific individual recommendations on the workplace profile before we moved on? I'm sure that there are a number of individual comments, but as a general theme.
I'd be interested to see whether we were next taking a survey of staff, because I think these figures should be measured against the survey, general staff's attitude surveys. I'm not sure when we did the last one, but I think they should.
I think that was within the last 12 months, wasn't it, Robin? The staff attitude survey, more generally than home working, that's an annual one, isn't it?
So there's two things going on here. There's some specific surveys around the where work happens and around COVID and home working. But yes, we will be rerunning the same standard staff survey because it's important that we compare data from year to year. And you know, as a set of staff, we've managers on that project, we've considered whether that's overload in terms of surveys. We've decided no, it isn't. It's really important that we have a number of conversations with staff across the organisation and gauge views, you know, periodically.
Thank you. We'd certainly endorse that, I think.
Madam Chairman, that was just the point I was making was on page 166. 166 it says that survey is now being repeated with the addition.
That's the impact of the homework.
Yeah, with a view to making longer term changes to the working environment and office footprint. So there's some major decisions are being based upon a survey and some listening panels, a repeat of the survey that was made, where 26% of people of our staff said that they were less productive under homework. So that is, we need to listen to those people as well as the people who say that they were far more.
And Robin has just said that will be put alongside management's views on effectiveness, and there's a lot of issues to pull together, and we trust that that's going to happen.
Line managers will notice that anyway, presumably, a drop off in working.
Rather depends on A, how well trained they are, and B, how stressed they are themselves.
And whether the information gets to us. And the question I'm asking is, can we see this justification for the claim to domain, if there is justification, before we make major decisions on offices and everything else?
Okay, I think that's a fair comment. We did see a survey, a summary of the last attitudes survey, and I think this is equally important. Okay. Thank you. Okay, moving on to the final item on the agenda, which is property. We have a detailed report of the work of the property advisory board, and property investment advisory board. I don't think there's any need to ask Peter Vickers to talk to us about any of the items. They're all fairly self-explanatory. Did anyone have any questions?
Well, I mean, there's one which is of interest to me and Councillor Nicholson in particular. Wayhill Hayes, on a reference to response from planners by the 30th of April. Has that response been received?
Chairman, not at the moment, although we have a commitment to have it within the next week.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, if I may add, obviously we've all got a particular interest in what's going on at Wakeford East. I won't refer us to the pink pages because that's at this stage, unless others particularly want to go into the exempt matters. But it does say under Wakeford East that it's got a number of potential lets and whatever. But I thought I was told or given the impression 6 months to 9 months ago, perhaps, that that's all sorted at last. We've got somewhere, everything's going to be hunky-dory. And obviously that's turned out that doesn't appear to be the case at the moment. But this is one of the reasons why I think we really must have performance indicators that tell us what's really going on, how much money was spent on expertise in taking on these investments, and what are the ongoing costs of them, and all of those have to be taken into consideration when we look at what is our overall return that we're getting reported on. And that's why I think perhaps just one key performance indicator isn't enough to cover what we really need to know in order to understand what we're being told. You understand what I'm saying on that level?
I understand what you're saying. I'm not sure that it feeds into the performance indicator, but certainly the Wakeford East saga does roll on. Do we have a current timeline, Peter, as to when we might have any progress on that one?
Chairman, I hear what's being said at the table, but this is a very live negotiation with a fairly close partner to Waverley that we must respect, and the timeline is very much driven around their own budgetary arrangements. I can't really say any more than that because we're an open forum.
Okay, moving on to the berries, if I may speak on that briefly. We don't know what's the first project board of 12th May 2021. So we're saying a fortnight ago, there was a project board meeting with the purpose of approving award of a tender, and this is a tender to undertake option appraisal, not tendering for the development itself. Are we allowed to ask? Can I have an update? Was that approved? Was it ME as we might expect? Was this the executive working group that is referred to here? It says working group set up to address how the council wishes to operate. That's a big issue there. In a few short words. Who is it actually making the decisions on how the council is going to operate in the future? That's going through this executive working. Is it an executive working group? And then after that, if I can just speak briefly on Brightwells after we've had some answers to those. Thanks. Wasn't it?
Let me find out what has happened.
So give up on that one. Sorry, wrong question.
Was it something you said?
Gentlemen, I think we could still be broadcasting. So
It's fine. It's just gone off here. We can continue there.
But we were waiting for a comment from Peter Vickers. Can we?
Certainly, Chair, I will give that
We can
comment.
hear
I'll
you,
just,
but not see you.
okay, well, I can see myself, so I'm definitely here. Sorry for the humour. So the buries, Debbie did cover a lot of this in her presentation earlier. It's a project board overseeing the not just the tender but the redevelopment of the buries. Obviously, a big element of the how we work will come into that, because there is a element of the space that will be configured in whatever's going forward will be a part of the democratic and the officer workspace for this council, which needs to be understood. But they are separate work streams. That side of it will sit under David Allen as it has done since conception, and the progression of the options to how we can commercially redevelop the buries to reflect the asset value that we are sitting in as an office block is part of that tender. That's the point of the options appraisal. It was recently tendered. It doesn't need an exec decision on that one. It is a procurement process that we've gone through, and Montague Evans were the front runner in that process. It was quite a long process because there were a significant number of tenderers. Hopefully that's covered
Is
the
working
questions
group
that were asked.
referred to here an officer working group, Peter?
So the working group is an officer working group. It is effectively there's a transformation board. Sorry, the project working board, which is the buries governance.
Councillor Hyman,
and then there's a working group below that.
One, but it isn't.
No, it's not an executive one. It's so there's two levels. There's the higher management level, which overseeing driving the project forward, and then below that there is a group of officers actually involved in doing the legwork.
Councillor Hyman did say he wanted to talk about Brightwells. I'm very conscious that we are running very late, and I'd like to try and say we'll be finished by 10 to 10.
Actually, can we just check that on page 776, right next to where the page number is, it says easement at Lockswood Road, Chiltern. This isn't an investment advisory board item. That's a mistake. It is a land issue, surely, but I wouldn't have thought that would be considered to normally be within this document. I'm ignoring it. If we move on to non-PIA investment regeneration property scheme, we're talking about Brightwells there. It tells us that there's a green roof being completed on residential housing stock. We've been told in that respect that we have a number of solar panels that are going to be installed. However, the design of the scheme originally depended upon the mitigation of rainfall, some stormwater mitigation being carried out by the green roofs that were going to be installed. And if we're removing green roofs and therefore removing one of the functions that's part of the drainage strategy, then we need a planning application presumably to do so. Similarly, we've got issues with Brightwells Road South, which is being widened. It's being widened to do exactly the same as the big hoo-ha we've had at the bottom of Castle Street, where there is no centre refuge for pedestrians and it's becoming extremely dangerous for people. That we've had no planning application in to suggest any change to that. But most importantly, we are being told by Surrey County Council that they are negotiating with Crest Nicholson to remove the road network changes that were permitted in the Planning Commission in 2008 and again in 2012 when it was renewed. So, and even though Surrey are changing the planning, changing the scheme, removing the pedestrianisation very possibly, we don't know whether that's temporary or permanent, changing the Section 106 agreement, changing the
Councillor Hyman, can I
278.
say that this is making no sense to me?
Is it not? Okay,
And
well, the
can I
point
suggest that you have the germs of a detailed question that needs to go to the relevant.
I do keep asking it and I'll never get an answer. I don't think it's one of those questions I just can't get answers to. That is, are we going to get a planning application for all these changes before the thing's built out? There are a lot of changes being made.
No view scrutiny issue.
Sorry,
It's not an overview.
I don't think it's for us to be commenting on that. I'm sorry. It's not something I feel able to input into at all.
Right, okay, in that case, if we just, I don't know whether anybody else wants to speak on the exempt item.
I was going to
without going into exempt and making a reference where I believe it's possible to. My concern is if you look in line 5 and go across to market value, there is no amount to put in, whereas everything else does have. And of course, line 6, it's the other way around. There is no purchase price or there is no value in there that's currently valued at. But there is a market value that was presumably updated at 31st of March 2020, over a year ago. I would expect to have those in there, particularly if we're going to be basing any performance indicators upon this information.
Okay, I take your point on line 5. I suspect it's an oversight and that the timing is such that one would assume it's little changed.
But it was a year ago, obviously.
Chairman, can I just comment? It's not an oversight. The property was procured in November 20. The valuations I have seen very recently because we're completing our statement of accounts for the year. Valuations form part of that. And the valuation has to be done as at the 31st of March, so we weren't going to do it much before then. I can give assurance to the committee that the valuation is exactly as it stands on the books.
There is no market on the market
number
value
5.
2020.
So
Yes,
the purchase price and the valuation is not dissimilar.
Yeah, which is what I would expect. And I don't think it's reasonable to go for historic purchase prices. We've not asked for that information before, Councillor Hyman.
The only thing I would want you to just note number 2, the valuations there, and I don't wish not going to speak about it.
Okay, thank you. It is now 10 to 10. It is my stated objective to bring this meeting to a close. I thank you all for your patience, and I hope that Councillor Martin doesn't leave you in the lurch again.
Well, thank you.